tax records go live.
There we are.
When you get
We
it on
are
both
live, we
sides,
can now talk.
it would kind of balance out.
All right. I
Cost
think
should be-
I'm looking
It could be, yeah.
Can Jake do that? That's my question.
over and I'm finding,
I know Jake can do anything.
we have a
We had
proposal.
the technology to do it 25 years ago.
Okay, we have a proposal in the bill to step up or step down the schools to their new base payment. What's being asked is, we do not have any proposal to step up or step down, and I think we have to step down in order to make the money to do the step up
Tax rates.
to tax rates for the individual homeowners, because especially in the low spending towns that are using their tax capacity under the weights to hold down their tax rates, and these tend to be poor towns. When the statewide tax rate goes in, that is going to be based, these schools are going to get payments now
Yeah.
for the kids with special needs of one form or another.
But it's tax.
But the tax rate is in all probability for the high spending towns, the statewide tax rate may well be lower. But for the low spending towns, the statewide tax rate will probably be higher. Even if it's that interplay, if we're stepping the schools up, because those low schools are also going to be getting more money. And again, this will depend, and we can't really calculate on until we get the districts, because it will depend on the district wide.
I don't know if it was on the agenda, but it's come to mind because I realized I don't think that was addressed in the House bill, and I don't think
It's
we
not.
discussed it
No,
yet. So that's
no,
why
and
big open
it-
question for me that we need to figure out next week.
Well, I think it came up yesterday when we were trying to
Yeah.
figure out how come if all the House did was convert the tax capacity weights to dollar weights.
That's not all they.
Models, yeah, whatever they, how come the total spending came out higher? And decided that was probably because everybody wasn't raising extra money to provide those services. They were using that tax capacity to hold down their tax rates, because if the modeling is correct and everybody was using their tax capacity to provide the extra service, then they should have been extremely similar or close.
Look at that, just be really efficient.
Yeah, maybe they're really efficient.
Yeah.
But some of them will see a tax increase. I did run that by, and yes, they always said yes, that
So well,
was true.
probably get a pile more money too.
Yes,
Yeah.
and I guess that's what we don't know. And because we have not set districts and we have not determined, and we aren't going to this year, how the districts are going to be governed. And what the mix is in any district, some of those schools might not be there in 3 years. They might be absorbed. They might be in a district with enough property wealth, so they're, I don't know.
Usually when when all the things models get, about 80% of people are within like plus or minus 5%.
It's about
It's mostly the outliers that
Yeah.
you're.
which cause you all the problems. Yeah, no, the vast majority
They're within
No,
fire.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and that's the
That's how they set
argument
speed
that
limits.
a lot of people say for, that why are we changing our current formula? Even within our current formulas, it's just outliers that are making the difference between spending that. Large, and there are mechanisms in our current formula that we can use to address that.
The notion I have is sort of related to this topic. As we look at next week and so many topics in this bill, one comment I made to the chair when we were walking just before this is, it reminds me of the transportation bill from my 4 years on the transportation committee. That would have 58 sections spanning lots of different topic areas. And one thing Senator Mazza did that I think might apply here, because in finance, we don't really get these too many large omnibus bills, whereas we start confirming or closing out, as I would call it. We close out sections. I'm not saying today, but as we look at next week, if there's a section that we're all in agreement on, we close it out, and that way we get clarity after we move on to the next one. Otherwise, I think Thursday night we're going to be really late if we have to close everything out Thursday night pizza. Sheila, it's up to the chair.
Okay, and Julia, have you got copies of this or is it posted?
No, that is still, needing to be internally edited.
Okay. So
I can have
that's,
that ready by next Monday.
okay. Julia has set out a list of all the topics and then the questions we have to decide under those topics. The first one is base and weights, and we can get Tammy Colby on Tuesday. So my intention is we are going to deal with base and weights and make a decision, understanding that all of these are going to conference. But we are going, we started with that yesterday with the, why the two, we have two models. One, they took present spending and said, all right, to equal the present spending, they backed into this is what the base and the weights would have to look for. House did it the other way. They said, this is the empirically applied weights. This is how they get applied. This is, the base that would be empirically, and this is the number they came out with. We could take one, either, or something else. Supplemental district spending, we're going to have to make, we talked about it a fair amount. The House has a yield system. No, this too has a yield system. This governor has a
The governor has a statewide guarantee
guarantee.
and the House has a supplemental district spending yield, the recapture mechanism.
Right. And so we can look, people are used to a yield, so that part of what I want to do is, this is probably the most monumental change that the state's done in recent history, not ever. Because Act 60 did not mess with your school. It messed with your money, but it didn't mess with your kids or, what school they were going to. It didn't mess with your town center. So this one, we need to get right, and I'd like to cause the least upsetment possible. I would like to make this as smooth as we can and not throw any curveballs we don't have to throw the first year or two to move this as gradually as we can, but that's mine.
On the previous point, I think Tammy Colby's coming in on Tuesday for the weights. I don't know if that was.
Yes.
But and also, I didn't mean to derail the discussion. You have an agenda item with Julia talking about supplemental spending. I don't mean to segue into that.
Well, the other one is supplemental spending. We spent a fair amount of time on that, and we spent a fair amount of time on the income sensitivity, the homestead exemption. I think we're going to have to pull the trigger on that fairly quickly. we can say that we could do an exemption and put caps on the exemption. That's what we seem to be seriously discussing doing yesterday. Knowing that there'll be some winners and losers. I'm getting a lot on the clip in the 47,000. I think the proposal we saw where the 47 would just apply to your local tax, that would become somewhat meaningless to most people whose taxes are minimal. But I think we've worked on that one. Anyway, on Monday, I would like to clean up the stuff we've been through, the kind of extraneous and not necessary to this bill, the whole reappraisal section, the property sales section, finalize the stuff we have talked on. And we have done a lot of talking, but no on both that homestead exemption, income sensitivity. First, are we going to do it? And then if we're going to do something to give some reduction, then what are we going to do?
Julie has a presentation on that for now.
Julia has presentations, and then and get that out of the way, and then on Wednesday, we can just make the really hard decisions we haven't made in the previous 2 days, and on Thursday we'll vote it out early.
Sorry.
Yes.
I'm willing to do the hard work and figure out income sensitivity and TC and that equalization ratio for the supplemental spending, but I'd be equally amenable to saving those two topics for 2026.
Okay.
Just, but if you want to do it, the next 5 years, I'll work hard.
We can, let's see how far we get in reaching agreement. We do need to be able to tell school districts this year so that they can start to plan what they're going to get in the base and the weight. So they've got to know what they're coming. We got to be able to tell them how we're going to have their kids. We have to do that. I think it would be helpful as they're planning if we could at least tell them we are anticipating being able to help with their bond payments. No promises, but that we are working on a state, all things being equal and the bottom not falling out of the economy. Our plan is to give them some aid to paying a bond if they feel in order to plan to handle these new rates. I think we probably should give them an idea of transitioning to the new rate so they know they're only going to lose it. It'll be lose. They're only going to lose so much this year.
Transition for their rate and transition for their payment.
Yeah.
I think one thing, and I think Julia and Jake are working on this, is, and it obviously depends on which formula we go to, but a consensus tax run so that we can see what the tax rate would be. So it'd be helpful to see like how big a swing it
Yes.
is to see what kind of mechanism we may or may not need. If the swings are really minimal, we might not need as much, or if they're really huge, we might need so.
But we've got to make some decisions before that. And so anyway, the more we can decide quickly,
The To Senator Beck's point, I too, I'm ready to, if we walk through the slide deck that Julia has on the tax exemption, and then today, for example, my previous point, we just conclude that this makes sense, we want to go in this general trajectory, but we want to somehow charge Ledge Council to draft us so that we can finalize this in this coming years. I think what I heard you say, Senator Beck, so not necessarily fine tuning all of the weeds on this, but instead delaying the action on the tax exemption shift to next biennium, if we want to do that after we go through this.
Well,
Next year.
Oh,
yeah, I
I
think
think you just have to be
Once
careful. There's a
the
lot
big
that's
one
gonna
will
come
be
up.
setting the districts. I think we can assume once we have actual districts and actual property values and once the legislature has voted, we will sit down and rerun every one of these calculations to see if there's been a swing and how much of a swing there's been, and see if we need tweaks, adjustments, or complete notwithstandings. Nothing is written in stone until the entire package is put together and enacted.
May I ask a
Yeah.
clarifying question, maybe for Senator Beck, but maybe for everybody? Are we contemplating sort of dividing the bill into sort of the tax piece and keeping the education governance and
I'm not, that's
foundation
not,
formula?
I'm not,
No.
that's not my decision.
We have to do the money pieces. I can't see how between now and, I'm not clear between now and Thursday, how we're gonna get through the money pieces. The governance section,
So when you say money, so you mean, you're not talking the foundation formula, you're talking about all the tax. And
no, we're gonna look at the base funding, that's what we're gonna do, that's the foundation one.
okay.
Yes, we are going to, that is money.
I'm not gonna lie, Madam Chair, I'm starting to worry about our runway to Thursday, and so I just might suggest that Julia and Jake are here with this slide deck. And it might be
Yes.
really informative for us to jump
I
in.
think we should jump in there and go. And on Monday, we will start out with the review of what we have or have not decided. Always subject to revision. Okay.
All right. Good afternoon. I'm Julia Richter, Joint Fiscal Office.
Welcome back.
Thank you. So there is a slide deck on the committee page under my name. It is dated from yesterday because I was supposed to give it yesterday, and then there was other pieces that so I didn't get to it yesterday, but that's why the date is different. Go ahead and share my screen, Madam
Yes,
Chair.
please. Anytime.
All right.
All three of us have it up on ours, just so you know, we're not cheating. We all have it up on our.
Oh, you all have it on your screen. Okay, nobody's playing solitaire.
No,
Chittenden might be
No,
playing
I'll
solitaire.
No, this is planned it so I can read it.
We got minds.
You nerds over here.
Yeah.
I also have that on my screen.
Julia's not playing solitaire.
How about Senator Brock?
So some of these slides will look familiar, others are new to this committee. And this is sort of level setting H 454, the homestead exemption component.
Right.
In terms of what was passed by the House. I've also included the administration's original proposal. We're nonpartisan. So what I did here is a brief review of income sensitivity, what a homestead exemption is, and the modeling assumptions. And then a brief review of the administration's proposal for a homestead exemption, and then what you all got from the House in H 454. So under current law, this slide is very familiar. There's a property tax credit based on income. If households were to pay less on property tax than on income tax, the difference would be credited in the following year. There's a few different buckets in terms of income and house site value that can be used for the calculation of the property tax credit. Getting back to something that we spoke about yesterday, moving away from our current education tax structure, where the homestead property tax rates and the education income tax rates are set using the local spending adjustment and the yields. By moving away from the yields and the local spending adjustment, there will need to be changes to the property tax credit if you want to maintain the property tax credit. So it's just
one
can't
will
roll.
continue next year under any of the bills that have come. This is what will be continuing unless we do something, but nobody has touched this. And this, along with the yield we just set, will be what happens next year.
Yeah, exactly. So this, thank you. So this will be used in FY 26 property tax bill calculations. Thus far, there's no changes for FY 27 property tax calculations or property tax credits. The only piece that the only reason I'm mentioning this here is once there is a shift, assuming there's a shift from the current financing structure to a foundation formula where there's no longer a local spending adjustment, the property tax credit will no longer be able to be calculated. So if you want some sort of income sensitivity, there would need to be at least some sort of change. A homestead exemption, this is familiar. It's an income sensitized exemption to a certain portion of a household's property value from the homestead property tax, or if there were a uniform tax, from the uniform tax rate. Essentially what this does is decreases the tax bill by making the base that's being taxed less than it would if there were no exemption. I'm going fast through all of this because it's familiar and I know that you've got a lot on your plate. Modeling is complex of this and requires a lot of different assumptions regarding the mechanics and levers at play. JFO and tax have worked really closely on having our modeling line up and trying to use all of the same underlying assumptions. Those include, we're only looking at filers who qualified for a property tax credit in FY 25. We're pretending that there's no property tax credit lag, and the lag being that the property tax credit is being applied on the bill in the year that it's received, projecting income and holding everything else constant. So this is the group of households that we're looking at. Essentially, we're looking at house sites with a household under household income under 115,000 in FY 2025. Essentially, the way to read this chart here is saying within this income bracket, income groups, there were 2,100 households that had a house site value between 0 and 100,000. So you see we're looking at 105,000 total house sites in this modeling. It's a lot of forms, yes, Senator. We know this is something that we spoke about during the yield bill, that households that do not qualify for a property tax credit may not submit their household income because that's not required under current law. This is the same data, but I broke it out even further to have a better insight into who are the households that we're looking at. So I've separated household income into 5,000 groupings, as well as the house site value of 50,000 groupings. This is equalized house site value, meaning 100% of fair market value. And obviously they've been rounded to 10, so it's a little bit simpler to read. This I've shown you before as well. This is the average net education property tax, net meaning it's their education property tax minus the property tax credit they received in the year, minus the property tax credit they would have received for that year.
Julie, can I stop you for a
Yes.
second? What you're going through right now, just to be clear, is just sort of table setting for what
Yes.
you're doing. So this is the data that you're
Yes.
using, the categories you're
Right.
using.
Yeah.
These are
Thank
actual
you.
Vermonters with
Yes,
actual.
thank you. Maybe I was just like too enthusiastic going into it. Yes, absolutely. So what we're looking at here is all of the underlying data upon which we're calculating different house site exemption models. So this is the same data that the tax department that the administration used in calculating their homestead exemption that we're about to look at, as well as the data that we use and looked at. The reason it may look familiar is this is the same underlying data when we looked at just a full repeal of the property tax credit, who exists in all of these buckets. These are all of the assumptions. We've got, I think, one more slide of it. But essentially what we're looking at here is under current law, a household with income between 0 and 25,000 in a house site of 0 to 100,000 in FY25 would have an average bill of $170
Oh, okay.
if the property tax credit were to be applied in that year. That's how we read this slide. Household income between 110,000 to 115,000, and a house site value of over 400,000. The average bill for those households would be $6,790. This is current law.
This is under current law.
Yep. So essentially what we're doing in the modeling is we're looking at this. This is the same exact data but now broken out into that more granular look. We're looking at, okay, what are the average bills of all of these different households? And then we're modeling different homestead exemptions and looking at how their average bill would change under a different homestead exemption. What are they estimated to pay under current law? What would they be estimated to pay in this homestead exemption? And what is the difference? That's where we're going. Is that enough level setting?
Yep.
Okay. So that's the background data. Now moving into the administration's proposal for a homestead exemption. I included this here because it was I know it was a long time ago when we talked through this. So this is what was presented back in January. So essentially, the Department of Taxes recommended a homestead exemption tiered on income. And this is essentially the way that it would work. If your household income was up to 47,000, then you would be able to exempt up to 60% of your homestead with an additional 10 homestead value, with a house site value rather, with an additional 10% for seniors. And the maximum exemption to the most amount of value that you could exempt from your property would be 200,000. If you were if the household income was between 47,000 and 90,000, then you could exempt 50% of your house site value. Again, a maximum exemption of 200,000. I know that some folks are visual, so I put together a little chart just representing this framework to look at. So the way to read this chart is you have household income on your x-axis. You've got your house site exemption percentage on your y-axis, your left y, and your right y is the maximum exemption. So the green line is showing you the percent exemption that you would be eligible for within the household income, and that corresponds with your left-hand y. And the blue line is showing you the maximum exemption that you could take, which corresponds with the right-hand axis. So you can see here that there's a pretty significant change at the 90,000 mark, right? There's a step down at the 47,000 mark, which corresponds with the table, and then a further step down at the 90,000 mark, and then a further step down at 125. For both that exemption as well as the maximum exemption. This was the modeling presented by the administration about changes in their average bill. So again, this is looking at how much, essentially what the background modeling is, what is the average bill under current law? That's what we looked at a few slides ago. What would be the average bill under this homestead exemption, and what is the difference? What we're seeing here is the difference. So the cells in red represent that amount of increase to the property tax bill, and the cells in green represent that amount of decrease in the property tax bill. Right, so under this exemption structure, a household with income between 0 and 10,000 and a house site between 0 and 100,000 would see an average increase in their property bill of $100. 90,000 to 115,000 of household income, and a house site value over 400,000. I'm just choosing these because they're the polls in the table. Would see an average decrease in their tax bill of $300. So the House took the homestead exemption idea, but wanted to work on the structure and the impacts of the homestead exemption. So this is the homestead exemption that was included in a 454 as passed by the House. It maintained the general structure, meaning it maintained a homestead exemption based off of household income. Yeah,
Julie, the administration's proposal, did it cost the same amount of money as our current?
yes.
It did, okay.
Yep. Yeah, so the administration's proposal was modeled so that the cost would be the same as the current income sensitivity.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Sorry, I probably should have included that. So 454 is passed by the House. It changed the parameters. And those changes were to the percent, the household income brackets, the house site exemption percentages, did not include some sort of maximum exemption or a cap, and did not include a senior specific exemption. With these changes, this proposal is estimated to cost approximately 45 million more than income sensitivity under current law. The modeling that we've done assumes that the 45 million is going to be raised by an income stream other than the homestead property tax rate. And that gets back to sort of that circular modeling. I think someone at this table referred to it as the hamster wheel. Where sort of the idea being you have the homestead exemption, it costs a certain amount, you raise that amount or lower that amount on property taxes, then the homestead exemption has a new cost. And with that new cost, then you need to recalculate the rates. Recalculating those rates results in a new cost to the homestead exemption, so on and so forth. So what this essentially does is says, this costs 45 million more. It's not being raised on homestead property tax for the purpose of modeling, but we need a hold in our heads that it does cost more.
Okay, so yes, the base amount you'd have to raise with all the tax would be 45 million more in order to buy down the taxes of everybody we just bought down with the exemption.
Correct.
All right, so everybody's rate would go up, including those who weren't getting the exemption, in order to buy down some, probably the majority of taxpayers' payment.
That's correct, assuming that the cost of the homestead is the increased cost of the homestead exemption falls on homestead property tax rates.
Where else would it fall?
So under current law, we have homestead and non-homestead. So the non-homestead rate could be increased. If you were to maintain a homestead and non-homestead structure in the future, you could increase the non-homestead rate to cover it. If you had different classifications within non-homestead, you could increase one or all of them. That is not contemplated. I mean, for that is so all else equal, it needs to be raised from some property tax.
This on my list from Monday. Right now, there are homestead and 3 non-homestead calculations. We've got to just, under present law, there is homestead and non-homestead. We have charged different rates to them. Initially, when we separated them, I think it was the session after Act 60, we set a higher rate on non-homestead properties than on homestead. But I think it's been pointed out to me, we also had a phase in of your tax rates. Because again, there were some big losers. And there were some big winners, but it was the big losers that we were looking at. And we divided up, but we did higher rate there. Sometime in the last 20 years, we have said that the non-homestead would go up at the same percentage, right? Or the
Same average bill increase,
average bill.
which is what you did also this year in the also.
So, to kind of equalize it, and we haven't sat there. So last year, we looked at all kinds of ways to tax the two categories differently, trying to find a way to smooth out that 18% increase. And in the end, we did, but, so the present law is there's two rates. And any change from that, we can try and differentiate it down. But we can try and continue to look at that. And see where we go with it. Senator Chip.
I'm jumping ahead to your next two slides and I don't want to steal your thunder.
No, let's get,
I'm gonna stay on this slide.
Yeah.
Ask a question.
let's finish this slide.
Current law, what raises the property tax credit? Is it solely the homestead property tax rate or is it the homestead and non-homestead?
Like what
Assuming-
revenues,
Yeah,
homestead and non-homestead.
so both of those rates, when you're solving the ed fund hamster wheel, as we're calling it. Both of those rates go into coming up with that $150 million.
Yeah, so essentially the way to think about it is we have the ed fund,
Mhm.
right? We have all of our expenses of the ed fund,
Mhm.
subtract out our non-property revenue sources. Essentially, what we do is we book the property tax credit as a negative revenue.
Mhm.
So we have our total expenses minus our non-property revenues plus our property tax credit. And then that needs to be made up by homestead and non-homestead. The amount that it's made up by homestead and non-homestead is determined in the setting of the yields and the rates annually.
Right.
How much of that pie is being filled with non-homestead versus homestead?
And I don't think we have, since we set the ratios, we haven't talked, but we haven't said, well, we need to raise money this year, so we'll up the non-homestead an extra %.
My understanding is that, so this is my fourth session here. So since I've been here, it's been a uniform average bill increase. My understanding from my predecessor is that, that did happen in the past. But that hasn't been reported anywhere that I'm aware of. So
I think that's why the ratio was set, was to give predictability, but also some sameness so that the non-homestead was paying into the rates, the same rate of increase as the homestead. And that seemed to solve the problem of having us monkey with it every year. And Senator McDonald is not sitting here, but he could explain to
Missing
you
him.
all the levers that you could pull that would cheat the homeowners and everything that every governor has ever tried to pull to cheat the homeowners.
I don't have those stories.
You do not have those stories. I do not understand all of those. He knew every little gear sprocket.
if it's helpful context, in FY 2025, so last year, the average homestead rate and average, right, because it's adjusted all across the state. So it's gonna be higher in some places, lower in other places, and it's equalized. So the average equalized rate, caveat flag, was $1.30. and the uniform equalized non-homestead rate was $1.391. So about 9 cents higher.
The average, yeah, and see, when we first said that, it was probably the reverse. That the non-homestead rate
No, this is the non-homestead rate is the $1.391.
is the dollar.
$391, the non-homestead rate was higher. Is higher than the average homestead
Oh,
rate.
it's 30.90.
So in FY
I was
twenty,
seeing that is $1.0391.
no, the
Ah,
homestead was. And the non-homestead was that.
okay, so it was just slightly high. Not so in all of my towns.
Right, so that's the piece, the average, right?
And I know one town, it was well over 10 years ago, that the non-homestead went below the homestead. Small town, no one knew, but some of the larger towns have made that switch at this point. One in particular.
So that's sort of the underlying conversation here of with the 45 million and more. How would that be picked up? Well, it's fair to assume it would be picked up by property taxes unless there was another policy decision made. Which property taxes it would be picked up on is an outstanding policy choice. So this is the homestead exemption that was included in H 454 as passed by the House. What you see here are the steps on the household income groups that would, and then the corresponding house site exemption. And I know that I keep saying homestead exemption,
Chopping up the bits.
homestead exemption versus house site exemption. Homestead exemption is the term, the title that we're using. But we're talking about an exemption on the house site value, right, which is the principal dwelling and the surrounding 2 acres. So
So that doesn't change.
it doesn't I mean, that would be a policy choice, but the house doesn't.
We're still talking about that house.
House site.
House site, and that's why it is actually was a technical decision in each of these, if I'm saying homestead or house site, and that's what.
I think we usually refer to it as a homestead.
Right, but the homestead is the
It's
dwelling and all surrounding land acreage.
right.
And the house site exemption is saying you can only apply the exemption on your principal dwelling and surrounding 2 acres.
2 acres, and yes.
Can't imagine why people get all confused about it.
Was this are we good for me to continue? Okay, it just. This trackpad doesn't work well.
There you
So. This is the same format of the graphic that I showed before, but what we're seeing here is the homestead exemption in H 454 passed by the House. There's no blue line because there's no cap.
Okay. When you said that the house cost 45 million. Remembering, but I thought the present system costs. What?
Yep, so the 45 million is referring to in relation, 45 million more than income
More than
sensitivity
what we
currently.
cost now.
So income sensitivity generally falls somewhere between 150 and 160 million.
Okay,
This is 45 million on top
so we are
of that
giving
current law cost.
$45 million in tax relief in this one.
Correct.
And it will be
I don't know if you can say it that way.
more than we are now. It costs 45 million.
Well, if you raise it with a property tax, you're
Well-
at zero.
I'm gonna come up with
Well, yeah, but we're giving it to the lower and more moderate income, which, yes, we're taxing everyone. I think arguably those that don't get anything back, okay. But we're doing more of that here. We're returning, we're taxing somebody 45 more and we're returning 45 more. Sometimes the same group of people, sometimes not. And it's balanced with that is we've been putting $100 million a year in tax relief for the last 2 years. That isn't showing up, so.
So I got three things to say on this. So one starts with the 45 million. I'm very concerned with that 45 million. I just don't think we can come up with it because there's going to be lots of other pressures on us. So my question is, if you're on your laptop, and I'm not asking you to do this, Julia, but if you went back up 5 slides, you would take the administration's proposal and overlay their line. Their line was at 60 and then it dropped, I think, to 50 and then it dropped to 10.
Yeah.
So this one, so there's a green line. Don't worry about the blue line here. My question is, to get that $45 million to move that down, to not have that $45 million come from somewhere, be it the homestead rate, property tax rate, somewhere else. I see 2 levers that I would propose for this committee if we want to tackle this week, or if we want to punt, that's fine too. One, I wonder if we might want to look at more like where the administration is. I love what the House did with the increments. I think that makes a lot of sense. But why go up and start at 95%? Why not start at 60%? There's 2 certainties in life: death and taxes. People know they're going to pay their property taxes, and we got to fund our schools. So I'm just wondering if the 60%, and I know that we probably did that so to be less harmful to the most lowest income individuals. I'm wondering if you modeled that. And the other piece that I'm going to have on the slide after this is I really do think we need to put a cap on this, because if you put a cap on this, that saves $5-10 million of that cost. And I also just don't like the idea of a $3 million home getting 95% exception.
The other thing to remember is increasing number of our population are living on fixed incomes. And the price of groceries is also a given, and they're going up.
I bring up the notion from the tax department about the senior 10% additional exemption. If they think they can do that, I certainly am sensitive to seniors.
I like that. I don't know that it's as necessary on the lower end as it is on the upper end, where you have people living on modest incomes with, that's just my brand.
I think crystallize my point. I would just say we consider bringing that green line down to where the administration was with the incremental steps. But sorry, that's enough.
No, I was just gonna say, if you go to the next slide, to build off of what Senator Chitten's saying, is I think what the governor's proposal does is it lines up, in my head, it lines up your income with your house value. So in theory, the folks that are getting hurt the most are ones that have lower incomes, but very property tax wealthy. Flip side of that, the people getting helped the most are those living in very modest homes with higher income, is what that kind of tells me where the winners and losers are on there.
But I mean, just looking at this, the lower income people, all the red are paying more.
Yeah.
So more people are paying more, and the people who are paying more are the lower income people across the board.
Yeah.
So it's just, it's not structured well. I mean, I think what the House was trying to do was get fewer people that were paying more, and you can see that the little white L that we talked about previously is small, much smaller in the House version. And it's part because they put more money into it, but it's also because it's ramped better than the original proposal. And I mean, I appreciate that Jake put this on the table, and I know you were trying to do it within the sort of structure of our current steps, but it really does create the people who pay more are the very people that we're trying to help the most, which are the lowest income people. So it just doesn't seem
But would you make
tenable.
argument that those people probably have more wealth overall?
The lowest income people?
Well,
Could a person making $10,000 get a $400,000 mortgage right now?
Well, I mean, I think that's somebody who, I don't know how many people are in that category. That would be that, but. I think, those would, yeah, exactly. Those would probably be people who are on a fixed income who, are.
Actually,
It also is about, what's the term? Home, it's, household income. So it could be multiple people living in a house.
Because you still show up when you do your homestead declaration, you have to have household income. So you can't get a $400,000 mortgage and have $10,000 household income form.
They might not. I don't know who the people are. I'm just
No.
saying they're lowest income people.
There's always going to be trustafarians and poor people with rich houses or anything you want to.
Well, what I'm saying is that those people have probably been in the house for.
I think part of, I'm looking at
As to.
the tables. And the average impact of the house exemption is, it's people in the 60s to 80 to up to 90, so from to 90 with house values over 300 are the only ones that are seeing increases.
I asked a question of Julie and then I kept talking, but on this one, do you have a modeling scenario where you effectively bring that down to the 70 or 60%?
I could, I don't have that ready to go right now. I certainly could. What you will see, and this is a question, is, it gets back to that squeezing on the balloon. You're going to see that there will be an increase in the households that are of the lower incomes. So the house, the conversation in the house was to try to minimize the number of people that would see an increase in their property tax bills, and have a more smooth structure. I do have modeling. I thought that someone might ask, not included in this slide deck, but I have a couple more slides and then we can go over to that if that would be helpful, or I can do it now. That shows the impact of a cap. I have modeled a $500,000 and a $400,000 cap. But just to finish up here, if that's okay. What we're looking at here is the average impact of the houses version. So the blue are the folks that would see a decrease in their property tax bill on average, white being folks seeing an increase in their property tax bill. Again, the additional 45 million cost of this exemption is not included in these bill estimates.
So these are.
But what we're seeing here is that lower income households are estimated to see an average decrease, while sort of this little white L that a lot of folks have been talking about would see an increase.
And those
This is looking at
moderate income people in high value houses.
Yeah, the other piece is here that this table and the other tables were set up this way to be sort of more consistent with the way that the administration presented their modeling. But if you break it out so it's more granular, you see here that it's no longer little white L. Right now, these are the folks that in white would see an average increase in their property tax bill, while the blue would see a decrease.
I mean, it
Okay.
just seems like there's a lot of people in that group, but I don't. Just maybe I'm wrong.
300,000 with a middle income.
Yeah, and it seems like a real middle class.
The thing that interests me the most is that white sliver at the top, the average is covered up because it's a very low income group with a very big benefit over 500,000. So what averages that out to be a overall for those income brackets? Yeah.
I'm very sensitive.
Yeah.
You may.
I am very sensitive to putting more tax pressure on lowest income individuals with this configuration, but I remember Tim Ash, who when I first started this role, I sort of took over he said, what you can always do when you balance those things out is think of other ways and other tax policies that we do have in place that do help those with the lowest income. So I don't want to tax the lowest income individuals, but if this ultimately does put a little more pressure on people that have a higher value home, but lower incomes, I think that I can stomach that as long as we understand what those impacts are and communicate them effectively to the people.
So so this one basically hits folks in the $50,000 to $100,000 range with nice homes.
Maybe $400,000.
Yeah. That in Montpelier is any one of the raised ranches up
Yeah.
here. It's not a McMansion
I think there's a lot of people.
in those groupings, which is what we don't know. And the governor's proposal
That's gonna be convenient over the next.
hits, it hits all the low income.
Yeah, I think that one piece that's also important to keep in mind here too, when looking at these charts, is we're looking at the average bill change in relation to current law, right? So we're not looking at the overall bill. We're looking at how much is someone estimated to pay in current law, and how much would they pay under these different proposals, and what is the difference?
Under current law.
So
So this is not figuring a foundation, this, you know, a base state payment. This, which until probably has, it helps understand in relation to current law. But once we go to a foundation formula and you take out local spending, some of those numbers are going to change. Some of them will see decreases just by the decrease in the funding formula, and others will see increases. So, but
This is on average.
on average,
Yeah.
yes, and
And
we all
so-
know there is no average person.
And so if you wanted to understand just the bill itself, how the bill itself would look for one of these groups is back in the level setting, I'm gonna scroll, so avert your eyes. Scroll back. Here we have that, this is that average net education property tax.
Mhm.
Right, so this is telling you on average, how much is somebody's property tax bill going to be after accounting for the property tax credit? And under current law, yes. Thank you. And then this is saying, compared to current law, compared to that table that we just had up on the screen, this is saying, how would it change under this proposal? What is the estimated change?
So,
I mean, somebody's gonna have to pay for all those blue squares.
so does that mean like your
21, Madam Chair.
top over 500 grand, 0 to 5,000 income? It's gonna be $4,310 savings, and then when you went all the way back up to the top, it was a $4,800 net. So is their tax bill of $500?
I don't
Is
do
that the
that
way
in
to think
public,
about it?
but that's the way.
I just did it, yeah.
But
Wow.
I mean, what you're getting at here is the intuition of. And the other piece to keep in mind is we're comparing to tax bills that are set according to these parameters that you have in current law. You have you have the circuit breaker up to 47,000 with a certain percentage of your income. You have the threshold at 90,000. And then you have those corresponding house site values, right? Of 400,000 between up to 90,000, and then above 90,000 to 25. So it's not a coincidence that we're seeing the white squares stop at 90,000. Because that's where the property tax credit is less generous once you hit 90,000. It's also not a coincidence that we're seeing, I know you all know this, but I'm gonna say it out loud anyways, that above the 400,000 is where you are seeing those decreases in their tax bill. Because the property tax credit structure does not cover above 400,000.
Do you?
Okay,
Can I ask one more in the previous slide? And I'm really glad Jake's here. As I go through this slide deck, I'm more and more liking what you previously proposed with that adaptions from what the House sent over. But I remember what Jake's had. He had really 2 steps, and I'm wondering if we had less steps here, but instead carried over. So that if we actually go to the next slide or the slide previous with your graph, if the 60 carries over through until 90, that might it'll push. The bubble gets squeezed, but then I think we would have less of the white squares there, if I'm not mistaken. That might have been why you had those 2 steps and then the drop. Do you have any? I don't know if I can talk to it.
I think that
I haven't seen it come back, so.
Oh,
the
sorry.
more,
Right.
the more you don't do the micro steps, the more you're gonna create cliffs. I mean, that's what the
Sure.
original proposal creates, more cliffs. And then it, you know, makes a
Sitting
big
up.
problem.
It's got fewer cliffs, they may be bigger ones. Go, Jake.
Jake Feldman, Tax Department. The original proposal was trying to minimize winners and losers, although it may not look like it from what you saw. But there's a cliff in the current system, a big one at 90,000.
Yeah.
And the original proposal perpetuated it. That's why the green dropped at 90,000. And what the House did is trying to build a stairway through the cliff, which is a stairway would be much better, right? But that's why on either side of the cliff, you see the white and then you see some really nice blue below it. So they're saying we don't want a cliff in the system, and that's creating the winners and losers on the other side.
Well, you have,
You have lots of.
when you like look at the breakout in the income categories. You have a ton of winners and of losers in yours as well, because you create a whole bunch of, you create these three big cliffs. So it's, and that's not, it's not the slide that's up, but when, it's the, I don't know if you have the equivalent where you broke it out into the little. Yeah, no.
So you were saying pump this to next year?
It's, I mean, that's the best one,
Yeah.
but like, as the more granular income.
Oh, I don't have that.
Yeah, it's not in the slide deck. I think I've seen it in the past, but there's just within all of those categories, if you're comparing apples to apples with two charts, I think that the original proposal has more quote unquote losers. I hate that term, but it's partly because it's cheaper, and once you put more money into something, that's gonna, create fewer losers. But I just think that having cliffs in something is a bad, I like that the fact that the House created steps, not cliffs. If we want to spend less money, we can create different steps, but still doing steps, I think is better than doing cliffs.
One more thing. I like the houses better too. And the cliffs are not good. Cliffs are really problematic for a lot of reasons. One option on the House's proposal is either side of 90,000 to over the course of 3 years to kind of drop it down into the perfect staircase. Instead of going right to the perfect staircase in year one. And then you could kind of, even it out on either side, but.
There's also the cliff, the 47, it's like 47 to 50, we could, create a better step there that's not just a $3,000 step.
Definitely.
And if people don't want to spend as much, we don't have to go to a full 95%. You'd start at even like 80% or something and step it and then put a cap on it. It's,
Oh my God.
and thank you, Jake, for saying that you like the steps better, because that's what I'm trying to avoid at the cliffs.
Yeah.
It's it's always problematic in any kind of benefits program to create a cliff.
If we want to do this year, I would love to do or model out what Senator Hardy just echoed, which was lowering that 95 to something lower and then setting a cap to try to get rid of that $45 million cost. That's what
base that changes.
the increase in.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure I understand what you're talking about, but I'm not sure
More or less.
I'll send you a picture of it.
okay, thank you.
So I think, I can certainly do this modeling and work on it. The question, and it doesn't need to be answered right now, is what are the reasons that the House went with 95%? And I'm not saying it should be 95%, but I can tell you where the modeling, what the modeling is going to show. And what it is going to show is that when you go below 95%, that your households in this income group will see an increase. Because 95% is necessary if the policy objective is to not increase the tax bill of the households in this group. If you are okay with that, that's it. That's what it will show. And the only other piece that I will also flag is in terms of creating steps down. How much are the steps worth and where are the steps happening, right? If you're saying 0 to 25, we're okay with having some increase in this household income group, bring it down to some percentage, let's just say 50 because it's round. Does that mean that it's a 10% step down? So that lower household incomes are the only that qualify, or are the steps less? Like how big are the steps? How much are the steps? Where are the steps happening?
Do you have,
No.
okay,
Does, now I think I recall someone saying at some point that cap, upper end cap only saved 5 million off the 45.
I'll show you.
Oh,
If I may.
yeah,
But 400,000 would save 10 million, 500,000 cap. That's what I was.
Is that what was-
So this that I'm showing now, it says draft 1.1 because this was the model that I presented in the House one that was the number of their draft, but it's the same exemption. It's just if there were to be a cap. So if there were to be a house site limit of 400,000, the way that I modeled this was a little bit different than how the administration thought about an exemption cap. And essentially what I did is I said, okay, the house site exemption can only be applied against the first 400,000 of property value. And then everything above that, you don't get any exemption on.
Yeah.
So it would look, oh, I have a word slide. Allow for it to only be applied to a certain amount of property value. First 400,000. And this is estimated to decrease the exemption cost compared to what we just walked through by 10 million. So the exemption that we just walked through was estimated to cost 45 million in addition to the current cost of income sensitivity. And this would make it cost approximately 35 million more than current income sensitivity.
okay, so it's saved you.
This is what it would look like. So again, we have the blue line because that's the maximum exemption corresponding with the $400,000 cap. And you see it, the same step structure that we've been talking about this whole time.
Did you ever consider modeling similar to Jake's, is dropping the exemption amount at the higher incomes to 200,000?
Oh, I could do that. That was not what was asked of me to model.
Is it 200,000?
So like, when you start making 90,000, you don't get to exempt 400,000, you get to exempt 200,000. You can also use a proportional ratio, so it could be relative to a base amount, and so it could be a straight line.
Wait,
A consideration, when if it were to be a straight line rather than a step function, is thinking about the 6 pillars of the tax system. One of them is simplicity. For there to be a straight line, that would require equations to be included for calculating.
concept that you'd have to round your value out to $10 increments.
But you could still drop to a second level, like at the higher incomes, and that would save money.
Yeah, sure. That would be a policy choice. I know it would shift who is seeing which average real estate is.
Sorry, you got to ask the question. What,
I didn't know. Go for it.
I was trying to come up with steps. If we start 0 to 25, 25 to 40, 40 to 55, and then do $15,000 steps. Start at 70, 70, 60, 50, 40, 30, 20, 10. That's what I was trying to make it so it was what yours started at 60.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's, I was just trying to do the math to make the steps that even,
And if the committee would like, we can talk offline about, not the committee, I know that that's not allowed, but more like if there are certain directions and you want me to work on different modeling scenarios and come back. I can definitely do that.
I don't know if that's the right one. I was just trying to reasonable steps.
Yeah, we're trying.
Julia, I'm thinking that, the one where you capped it at 400 and it was, yeah, this one right here. So that's a $35 million increase to the PTC program. Did you look at this through the lens that you did the analysis where you concluded that 60% of the PTC program that are eligible, like actually don't even benefit from it, it costs them money?
I tried to, the challenge is that the challenge is that the cost of the exemption is dependent on the tax rates.
Right.
So we weren't able to identify a way
Yeah,
to do that.
we don't have tax rates right now. We don't.
I mean, that's my whole concern with this thing is it's a system where less than half of the people that are in it benefit. The other half are paying more than they would if there wasn't even a system. I mean, that's it's
income sensitization.
I just, it would be nice if we could just say, if you eliminate it, who's damaged? And just figure out how to protect those people.
I thought we had,
Eliminate all.
I thought we had looked, because you brought this up before, we
Yeah.
looked at a slide with that. right?
Yes,
Yeah, Julia showed us some
Yeah.
stuff, yeah.
And I
it's a while ago.
don't remember the exact details, but it was one of those things where no one ever asked to see it again.
I can show you,
Can you show that to us? So,
yeah,
We drive that tax rate up so high that it eliminates the credit that they get. So it's like,
Right,
For some
raises your bill up
Yeah.
and then you get a credit.
and you think
And
you're
it's
doing good, but
more
you're
than
really
if
not.
you just have a lower tax.
Yeah.
But they are in fact paying for that income sensitization.
well, they,
Right.
along
Some,
with the
some people make that
millionaires.
decision.
What we're doing.
Yeah, I mean, they're paying for it on the hiring.
Taxes go up.
Parties anyway, right, individually make that decision.
Oh, I don't know.
I mean, they aren't paying their
People
own.
do that?
Yeah, yeah.
Sure.
I think people don't file a homestead because they see that the non-homestead rate's lower. I think they're sort of.
the way that the property tax credit is calculated, that's naturally done, right? The tax department looks at when we do the consensus modeling and then the tax department does the final modeling, they look at how much was paid on property, how much would have been paid on income. If you would have paid less on income, then you get a property tax credit. If you would have paid
Right.
more on income, then you do not get anything.
Exactly, so that already happens.
And
It does.
it's too late in the session to
Yes.
multitask.
Yeah.
Too late on
It's never-
Friday.
The property tax credit, to Senator Matos's earlier point, is raised on property tax. Like when he asked when we talked about raising on the homestead and not homestead rate.
It's raised on all property tax, including all the people. That's everybody that doesn't get a tax credit.
And people that do.
Yes, it gets figured in, but I guess the question would be, do they get back more? What Julia just said, though, if you pay less on income than property, you pay on your,
Yeah, there's a few of those people.
there are.
High income, they live in a $150,000 home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is what we
Okay, there you go.
would see here. These are the slides. So if there was no income sensitivity, and you were to use that, repeal the income sensitivity to make, which would be 153 million that would not need to be paid out in a tax credit, then that 153 million could be used to lower property taxes. So this is what it would look like if it was used uniformly to lower the homestead and non-homestead rate. The caveat here is that we're only showing the household incomes up to 115,000, right? But we know that the household incomes above 115,000 would also all see decreases in their property taxes because they're never going to be eligible for a
Right.
property tax credit.
You also have this slide where it just all comes out of the homestead.
So that's what this is.
Right there.
So.
Yeah.
So this is if all 153 million were to be used to buy down the homestead property tax rate and there'd be no income sensitivity. So what you're seeing here is the same color, right? White, that's the average increase. So we're still looking at compared to current law. We know above 115,000 would all see decreases, right? Because their rate would be going down and they wouldn't be losing any sensitivity. So you would see the,
But the 390 more, that's, oh, no.
yeah,
So
so
that's zero, that's the property value, but that's people who are making under $25,000.
yeah, so this
So
is saying,
that's, now they are getting earned income tax credits and they are getting some other things. But that's a pretty steep tax increase, 100.
That's what I mean. You just build a property tax credit to protect those people that are in white. Just build it for them and don't push it over onto the blue people.
But how do you
Categorically,
categorical?
just make it categorically. 90 million bucks, pay for it with 6 pennies on the uniform and you're on your own.
Where you just send people grants essentially, or?
No, you just pay for it at a categorical rate instead of using the iterative, just increasing rate, increasing credit, increasing rate. Yeah.
And so you have, it still would have to be a credit. You have to
Yeah, they get it as a
essentially
credit.
get it.
But you're paying for it at a categorical rate instead of this iterative, keep increasing property tax rates to come. Because every time you increase the property tax rate, now you gotta, there's more delta between, it just.
Yeah, no, I know, but
Yeah,
I
it's an
think,
interesting idea. Yeah,
I mean, isn't that,
that's the hamster wheel.
With that one.
yes. And you can, that is going up, that's the $90,000 cliff right there, that's.
That's right. And I mean, here's something really interesting. I
Yeah.
think right now, of all these other states that use the foundation formula, I think the highest credit that anybody has is Maryland, which I think it's like $3,000. Sound familiar, Jake? Yeah, something like that. Look at these numbers. They're all like $3,000 or less. That's why our credit is so high right now, because we were in the statewide system and we had all this, with this Act 60 funding formula. But when you move to a foundation, I mean, there's no need to have a maximum credit of $5,600. Bring it right down.
No, the people that are getting $5,600 are not going to be happy.
But the rate they're paying on comes down dramatically.
Comes down dramatically. Can we model that?
600, yeah.
Do you understand what he's?
You're talking about getting rid of the exemption too, so the current exemption we're considering in the House bill. To just eliminate the income sensitivity, Senator Beck?
I'm saying solve these people's problem in white with a homestead exemption, which is really house site.
We don't want
I'm saying you solve those people's problem with Jake's mechanism.
I don't think it can be Jake's mechanism though, because I think if you're putting it as a credit, it would just be essentially sending a check to the people.
Okay,
If you need to target it that directly.
Jake and Julia, do you understand what they're asking? And can it be done?
We can talk about it.
That's worthy of one of us. Julia, I think what you're asking is for the folks who, if we just did away with the whole income sensitivity program right now.
Yeah.
And just everybody pay. Because we are not paying for income sensitivity, tax rates would come down under the present system. They will not come down under the new system, right? Because you're gonna be paying a flat rate. So I don't know if that translates, but if you say, okay, we're doing away with it, but the minute you start trying to do something to help those people, somebody's got to pay for that. And I don't know if that
I
would
think,
be that much less.
yeah, and even if you do a categorical aid, you have to pay for a categorical aid on the rate. So I'm not sure.
Be about a nickel on the homestead and the non-homestead.
Okay,
Back in the day.
I think,
No, they drove a categorically.
But you still have to pay for the categorical aid.
it's getting late, it's Friday. I wanna let Julia go through her slides. And the other thing we can do on this is until we get the district, until we make other, we are talking about a system that no longer will exist. So the question is, how long do we want to play with these numbers when this system will go away, because the state tax rate will be the state tax rate. And so that gets to be another set of things that we need to calculate, but there will be a flat tax for everybody to pay for everything that's going into that base funding, the foundation formula. And then if we decide to let them, towns will be able to vote X amount above that for either things we say they can, or for anything they want, or whatever. And I think it might be more helpful that if take any one of these flat tax rates, and I guess we have to go to AOE, but what would that flat tax rate look like if we just said we're going to do X, pick any one of those foundation formula numbers?
Yeah, so I can I've done some preliminary, Jake and I have been working, we've done some preliminary modeling on that.
Okay,
I'd love to square it away before I say it ever publicly. I'm hoping to be able to do that early next week.
good.
Just spoiler alert, the way that we are modeling it is essentially looking at what we're to try to do the best apples to apples comparison that we can do, looking at what were the FY25 rates. And then if all of those parameters were to be the exact same, what would an FY25 uniform rate have been?
Okay,
And then that way you can have an understanding of what a uniform rate would look like.
would it look like this year? And we can see what our non-uniform rate looks like this year.
When we say uniform, do you mean like a uniform non-homestead and a uniform homestead, or just
Right
one,
now, the proposal is everybody is paying the same tax rate,
whether you're homestead or not?
whether you're homestead or not. We can. We can adjust that any way we would like to adjust that.
I think the proposal is a uniform rate, but with the ability, with the 4 classifications, the ability to shift it around between those 4
And
classifications
sometime in the future,
eventually. So it's not the assumption that every year would
I mean,
be
I'm
the
thinking like that
uniform rate.
so the FY28 tax letter will come out on December 1st of 26.
yes,
And I'm thinking like our direction for that tax letter would be something like, notwithstanding legislative action, the non-homestead tax rate will be whatever it was in FY27. And the non-homestead will be whatever is necessary to pay all the categorically and EOPs and fill the reserve, and that would just be,
the non-homes.
no, so we'd say that the non-homestead in FY28 in that tax letter would say,
On 28,
I mean, we're just starting from scratch.
Okay, I'm still in
Yeah,
next
it
year.
would be whatever it was in FY27,
Okay,
okay? And then it would say the homestead rate will be in the tax letter, which is just guidance. whatever it calculated to whatever it needs to be to pay for all the categorically and EOP and building reserve and then it would just, that would just be it. And then, you know, we'd start the
I
process.
don't know that there would be a December first letter. Because the December first letter was meant
Yeah.
to make the taxpayers not vote for their budgets. It's one of the many things that we have
Yeah.
done. And saying to them, if you vote for the budgets, your superintendents or business managers are telling us they're gonna recommend, this is what will happen to your tax rate. Well, they're not gonna vote anymore.
Right.
So
Well, the
there's,
December first letter in the bill there's still one in
there's
there.
still.
It's modified a little bit. It would, for example, have whatever the rate would be for the excess spending.
An excess
The
spending.
supplemental spending, and it would tell,
Well, we
and there were a
haven't
couple other
decided
things that are
that.
in it, I can't remember, but it still exists. It's just a different purpose.
So, and it doesn't have to be December.
I also think we definitely need to talk about that the timeline.
I
It's
think
in
we
the bill,
do
the
for now.
timeline.
But one of the early proposals was to change the entire tax year. Because ours is,
I mean, it's just a guidance document.
yeah,
I love that we're talking about the bigger topics, but just to go back to the presentation we just had, and as I think about the chunks that we're going to tackle, I wonder if the committee would agree that this might be a charge to come back to next week to decide if we're going to punt on this or if we want to change what the House sent over to something to the following contours. One, adding a $400,000 cap, and that 400,000 is not arbitrary. If you do a quick Google of Zillow or other sites, the average and median household value site in Vermont is 400,000. In Chittenden County in Northwest Vermont, it's about 500,000. So there's that. But leaving that aside, if we cap it at 400,000, because that just, I think, is good policy for a lot of reasons. If we also charge or ask them to lower that 95% to something less than 95, but higher than 60, to effectively try to eliminate the $45 million additional cost, just to see what that looks like. And if that came back to us and that looks like something that we could support, we could add that, change the bill. Again, if it doesn't, then we basically just will decide then to punt this until 26. Is that a good charge to finalize this conversation when we come back next
can
week?
you
on this?
use that? We want to lower the top amount you can deduct. And we want to put a 400.
When you say lower the top amount you can deduct, what does that mean?
Yeah.
You
The
touch
percentage. So
the
you
percentage, the
currently cover
95%, drop it to 80.
So
or 60.
did you see
So
this?
60 or 70, no.
put a lower top step.
70,
You
I,
wanna pass it around?
yeah, here it is. That's what I did to try to make the steps even and
That's a 60. Okay.
Okay,
Sure.
all
Yeah,
right,
yeah.
and you can do that.
And then if
Without
that seems
staying
like something the
all night.
committee can get behind, we change the bill to have that for the tax exemption,
Okay.
or we
You can
punt
do
on
it
it.
on
next-
Monday morning before we come.
No,
in.
I will be able to have it, I will be able to have it done.
Okay.
So to confirm, you're looking for this,
Yes.
Ish.
do you want
This-ish,
oh,
me
with the
to,
$400,000.
is the ish like, look at a couple different iterations along this vein and a $400,000 cap?
Where I am is to be cost neutral to the current
Yeah.
PTC.
Yeah.
So I'd like to see the scenario where we get these step functions cost neutral to the PTC. And simultaneously, if Jay has some notion of what that 10% senior exemption would be, I'd sleep easier at night if that were to be folded in and it didn't cost too much. But however you had contemplated that in the original
I will
proposition.
say that in the tax bill that you just got put on the committee for, that's a lot of that is tax stuff for seniors.
yes.
So I'm not, because including the 10% for seniors will make it more expensive.
Yes.
So I mean, I'm hearing Chris to my left here saying, well, a lot of these people are young families with houses, homes in that sort of middle income range. And so I think we need to be careful, especially what you were saying earlier, like you think about all the
But
tax.
we also have people who are
Not critical.
fixed incomes and we don't have any place to put those.
So that's where I think we can come across as a sensible alternative to what the House brought forward, building and what they did to try to get it to be cost neutral to the PTC, lowering the 95 to something else like what Senator Hardy put forward and adding a cap of $400,000.
So if that
You want-
works, all right, what
They're gonna be
I'm
more
hearing
expensive.
we want to accomplish.
There will be more.
Think we want to accomplish something that doesn't cost more than it does now. And spreads the burden out as evenly as possible across tax groups. But trying to minimize the big steps and get it more to a more gradual. I think we've called it step down.
And love to hear more about what your fallback.
As you go. I think is that what we're trying to do, again, on the caveat that all of these numbers are based on the present system. And the present system will not exist if we go forward as it's being suggested we should. The present system will not exist in 3 years. So we will have to, once we set everything else, including, bases and rates and districts, we will have to just rerun the numbers instead of saying the same thing in the future state.
But if we get this back and it does not look palatable, what's the fallback? We just punt this, we take this out, and we deal with it when we come back into it.
You don't have to know in this year,
I don't know, that's what he said earlier. It's
but
not-
we are going to have, if we can get everyone in this body, a majority of the people in this body who agree on districts next year, this is the easy step.
That's true.
There's no way we would come back next year and not do proper testing. We just won't do that.
At least in a step up, step down, yeah, they're gonna have to do something, so.
Amended an execution in which the condemned dies slowly and gradually and in a consistent manner.
I think that's us, yes. But if life is miserable enough, that is a bonus. I think on that, Randy, it's time to go home.
We burning up bridges today?
What have we got left to deal with on Monday?
Everything was starting.
We've got supplemental district spending, and if we can get through that and all the extraneous stuff. Like transition mechanisms, property tax classifications. We're working, we've got construction, we're working on the thing. I think we've asked to have the language drafted to put the treasurer's suggestion. And Beth should have that for us, but I thought that was one of the things we agreed on, that we would kind of sort of maybe if we have the money, help you out if you choose to bond, but it wouldn't be on the state record, so it would not impact the state of Vermont's. We have a moral but not a full faith and credit effort to pay it. But we can take all the school's money if they don't. Those things,
That sounds so appetizing.
I know.
I like that.
but that's what we've been doing, and we pay our bills. A lot of this is verbiage to make the Wall Street bankers feel Vermonters balance their budget, even though we're the only state that is not required to balance that budget.
It's not unreasonable to think any district's capital expenditures would be 5 to 10% of their total. That would be